What if the biggest assumption in modern tarot is wrong? The one that organizes every book, every course, every YouTube playlist. What if the Major Arcana was never meant to be read in sequence at all? If you've spent any real time with the Western esoteric tradition, with Kabbalah, with the Tree of Life, with the Sefer Yetzirah, this question probably lands somewhere uncomfortable, because you already know at some level that the system underlying the tarot is not linear. It's a network. And yet, the dominant framework, the one most practitioners learn first and never fully question, treats the 22 major arcana as 22 steps in sequence. Today, I want to pull on that thread. Let's talk about where it came from and whether the system it replaced might have been telling a more honest story. If you learn the major arcana from any book published after 1970, there's a very good chance you were introduced to something called the Fool's Journey. The Fool, card 0, or 22 in some packs, sets everything in motion. He moves through the magician, the high priestess, the empress, the emperor, encountering each archetype as a station of development. One card naturally leads to the next. The sequence is the story. It's supposed to be your story. It's intuitive, it's elegant, and it has been extraordinarily influential because it's easy to explain and it fits nicely into a box. The phrase itself was coined in 1970 by Eden Gray in her book A Complete Guide to Tarot. Gray introduced the framework, the Fool traveling through the 22 cards as stages of growth, but left the full architecture to others. 10 years later, it was Rachel Pollack who made it foundational in the first volume of 78 Degrees of Wisdom in 1980. Pollack wrote that the purpose of the major arcana is that, among other things, to take us step by step through the different stages of life until it brings us to unity. She framed the Fool's innocence as something lost and the 22 cards as the map for getting it back. That framing became some of the most widely read tarot commentary in the English language, and it still is today. It's important not to be anachronistic when looking at this, because Pollack and Gray were not being sloppy. They were working with the best available scholarship they had at the time. The framework they built is coherent, meaningful, and has clearly served an enormous number of people. It's also worth noting that a legitimate reading of the Sefer Yetzirah does support the idea of a journey through the tree. The Tree of Life is a map of emanation and return, of divine energy descending into form, and of the soul moving back towards its source. Moving through the paths is inherently directional, inherently developmental. The Fool, assigned to the Aleph path between Kether and Chokmah, really is at the beginning of something. The architecture genuinely describes a kind of journey. So the Fool's Journey is not a fabrication. It is an attempt at reading the structure of the tree, but with an unintended consequence. The question is whether collapsing that journey into a single numbered sequence, a universal story that every practitioner moves through in the same order, does justice to what the Sefer Yetzirah actually describes. Because here's what the text actually implies. The paths each soul traverses are not the same. The architecture isn't a universal corridor you walk through from start to finish. It is a network, and different souls, by nature, by circumstance, by what I call their natal signature, move through it differently. Which paths are active, which are illuminated, which present the greatest friction or the greatest opening. These vary from person to person. The Fool's Journey, as it is commonly taught, makes the story universal. The Sefer Yetzirah makes it individual. But here is a question embedded in that framework that almost no one asks. Who decided that the magician is card 1, the high priestess card 2, and the world card 21? Who decided that these 22 things form a line in the first place? Tarot tradition says that the major arcana correspond to the 22 paths of the Sefer Yetzirah, the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, the 22 paths on the Tree of Life, which means the answer to that question lives here. Yet the Tree of Life is not a linear progression. Let's spend a moment actually looking at this. The Sefer Yetzirah, the foundational Kabbalistic text that underlies the entire tarot tree correspondence, describes 10 Sephirot and 22 paths. The Sephirot are the nodes. The paths are the connection between them. Now look at the geometry of this. The paths don't run in a line. They branch. They intersect. They move laterally, diagonally, or even vertically. A given Sephirah may connect to 3, 4, or even 5 other nodes simultaneously. Emanations can move through this structure in dozens of different directions. This is a network, a multidimensional architecture. The Sefer Yetzirah describes explicitly 22 paths moving between the 10 Sephirot. Never does it imply that the 22 paths are a linear progression. It's important to note that the traditional Kabbalah began long before the tarot. For those who don't know, the Kabbalah began with the Sefer Yetzirah, a collection of recensions written between the 2nd and 6th centuries CE, and then the Zohar came about in Spain in the 13th century. Tarot emerged in the 15th century in Italy, not ancient Egypt. Don't believe the hype, y'all. Tarot, as it developed in Italy and then later France, first grew independently of Kabbalah, until people began to wonder, is there a connection? No, not really, unless you want there to be. And together, when done right, tarot can illustrate the Kabbalah in some wonderful ways. A card placed on a pathway is not a step in a sequence. It's a quality of connection. It describes the kind of energy that moves between the two particular Sephirot in both directions and is dependent on whether the soul is in balance or not. Directions matter here. The paths on the Tree of Life are not one-way streets. Kabbalah, which when translated means to receive, can be traversed from above downward, the descent of divine energy into form, here in our 3D world, or as the Sefer Yetzirah talks about, the return, traversed from below upward. In other words, the human soul in its attempt to return towards Source or the Most High. The same path carries different qualities depending on which way you're moving through it. And sequence can't do that. A sequence only goes one way. Now, hold both of these images in mind at once. On the left, 22 cards arranged in a line numbered 1 to 22, sequential, one direction, one narrative. On the right, the same 22 paths, distributed across a three-dimensional network of 10 Sephirot, branching, multi-directional, not a story about a traveler, a map of an architecture. These two things are not the same. They cannot be made the same by good intentions or elegant metaphor. Something happened between the Sefer Yetzirah and the Fool's Journey. The system was translated, and somewhere in that translation, something dimensional was compressed into something flat. And I want to be careful here. I'm not suggesting that the Fool's Journey produces wrong readings or meaningless results. If the system underlying the tarot is a network, and the Sefer Yetzirah is unambiguous on this point, then organizing the cards into a sequence imposes an artificial constraint on a structure that was never built to be constrained that way. And the practical consequence of that distinction is real. If the cards are the steps in a sequence, then the question you ask about any card is, what comes before it and what comes after? Its meaning is partly constructed by its neighbors in the line. If the cards are qualities of connection between the Sephirot, then the question is entirely different. Which two nodes does this path bridge? What planet does the imagery carry? What does it mean to traverse this connection in descent from Kether to Malkuth or ascent from Malkuth to Kether? Those are two different frames that produce completely different readings, and they're grounded in different assumptions about what the system fundamentally is. So if we remove the sequence, the narrative of the Fool's Journey goes away. Now each card represents qualities of energy flowing along specific connections between specific nodes in a network. In the sequential model, the card's most important attribute is its position. For instance, the Chariot comes between the Lovers and Strength. Its meaning is partly constructed by its neighbors. So in this case, if you want to overcome the struggle you are having with desire, if you maintain focus, you will find strength. In the pathway model, the card's most important attribute is its function. Which Sephirot does this path connect? Which planet does the imagery serve? What quality of energy is active when this path is traversed, and in which direction? So going back to the example, the Chariot card falls on the path of Cheth, connecting Binah, or understanding, to Geburah, strength. Now the reading becomes something like this. The Chariot is not a moment between struggle and achieving your strength. It is a connection between the faculty of structure and the faculty of force. The letter Cheth means the fence. It speaks to the principle that form creates pressure and pressure creates direction. Binah, the great structuring intelligence, pours downward into Geburah, the seat of disciplined will. The Chariot rides that current. So the path asks, have you built the right containers? Because Geburah's energy, your drive, your assertive force, does not find its strength in willpower alone. It finds it in structure. The fence is what concentrates the pressure. Without it, you have desire without direction. By using tarot in this manner, according to traditional Kabbalah, you suddenly have something diagnostic, something tangible, whether you are reading for yourself or for clients. The path of Cheth can ask two things. If you're wondering about the wider world around you, or what is being asked of you, this would be Binah to Geburah. Cheth is read as, what structure needs to be built in your life to turn my understanding into the force of experience? If you're asking about how to accomplish something, so ascending from Geburah to Binah, Cheth reads as, what does this experience, force, reveal to me that I need to understand? The number is not the primary identity of the card. The path is. When you organize the tarot as a sequence, you're working within a framework that a fellow named Eliphas Levi imposed on a system that wasn't built to be a sequence. You're reading the Tree of Life as a complete story, but large parts of that story may not have anything to do with you. The unnumbered tarot, the tarot organized by planetary function on the paths of the Sefer Yetzirah, isn't the tarot with the numbers physically removed. It's the tarot approached with a different organizing principle entirely. The path is the identity, and the path is determined not by what number comes next, but by what the card's imagery has always been serving. Let me make this concrete with a single example, because I think it illustrates the stakes better than any abstract argument. If the connected system with the Sefer Yetzirah's Chaldean planetary attributions restored, the High Priestess carries the moon and belongs on the Tav pathway, at the base of the middle pillar between Yesod and Malkuth. Tav is the final letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Its meaning is seal, mark, or completion. It is the divine signature, the last word, after which nothing more needs to be said. Now look at the card. She sits between two pillars, Boaz and Jachin, the same pillars that stood at the entrance to King Solomon's temple. She holds a scroll, but does not open it. She does not speak. She does not gesture towards the viewer. Among all the active, gesturing, performing figures in the Major Arcana, she alone simply is present, still and receiving. Under the Golden Dawn numbering, she is card 2, early in the sequence, part of the opening movement of the Fool's Journey. Her stillness gets interpreted as mystery, as hidden knowledge withheld, as the veil between the known and the unknown. All of that is true, but it's a partial meaning. On the Tav path, her stillness carries a different weight. The polarity of this path, in the Sefer Yetzirah's framework, is mastery or slavery, and in that context, her posture is not just mystery, it is a demonstration of the only inner condition that makes true reception possible. The master holds still. The master can receive what arrives without distorting it. The slave reacts compulsively, and the grace that was moving toward them passes them by. She is not withholding the scroll. She is showing you the posture that makes it possible to receive what is written in it. The number didn't tell you that. The path did. This is what changes when the organizing principle changes. You forget the narrative and come to realize that there are better questions to ask. So where does all this lead to? If the planetary imagery embedded in these cards is the organizing principle, not the numbered sequence, then the numbering is not the card's real identity. It is a convention, a useful one in some contexts, a widely agreed upon one, sure, but a convention, not an inherent property of the card itself, which means something else determines where each card actually belongs on the tree. The something else is the images themselves. The symbolic language that developed across the centuries before Levi introduced his numbering sequence. The planetary vocabulary embedded in the symbols, the figures, the architectural logic of each card. This was the language spoken by the ancients before the numbering system existed, and it is still speaking now, whether the numbering acknowledges it or not. When the planets are restored to their Sefer Yetzirah positions, the cards that carry those planets' imagery return with them. The map reconstitutes itself not by someone's interpretive decision, but by the logic of the correspondence that was always there. And when it does, something in the system comes together in a way that the sequential model never could, because the sequential model was never built on the Sefer Yetzirah's actual architecture. Here is the question I want to leave you with. If the path is the card's real identity, not the number, then what does it mean to read the cards without the path? What are you actually navigating when you navigate by sequence alone? And more specifically, if the numbering has been obscuring something deeper, what might a card actually be saying when you return it to the path where its imagery has always belonged? Until next time.